Hello again, everybody. It is me, Rose Red Flechette, Connor, whatever you want to call me. I'm back again with the first episode of this series, and I think I'm just gonna dive right into it and start talking about basically the most, I think, difficult to swallow part of my music, and that would be my use of polyrhythms. And I'm going to cover a handful of different methods that I use, some of which I've borrowed, and some of which are more methods that I've come up with along the way that I think are a little bit different and are probably the result of me working within a sequencer as opposed to bands which may, which probably don't have that luxury during the composition process or the songwriting process, basically. Um, so basically, what I've set up here for you guys is we've got a basic loop, which I'm going to just go ahead and kick off here. Oh, nope, that's not what I wanted. So I'm going to have to solo these by track. The solo function in Reason, if you solo it on the sequencer, it doesn't actually solo the audio. It solos the sequencer track. So a lot of times I'll go to solo something, and if I've got something running through an arpeggiator, which the bass line is, it will continue playing that, and we don't want to hear it right now. So I'm just going to start off here with the loop that I've got set up here. This is a pretty simple, like, industrial sounding kind of distorted loop that I've set up. It's from the Sphere Beats refill and sound package. If any of you guys are interested in looking them up, it's got some really great, like, industrial percussion sounds. And obviously I mangle them beyond all repair whenever I use them. Anytime I gotta use somebody else's sounds, I usually try and fuck with them just a little bit. But anyway, so that's basically like a 4/4 structure, and that's really kind of what I go for at first. Is try and get that, that familiarity set up. We're working at 200 beats PM, 200 BPM halftime, so it really sounds more like 100. But there's certain, depending on your DAW, certain divisions of notes, 64th notes, 128th notes, however like tiny or large you can get them. A lot of that is gated by what BPM you're using, because if you're at 100 BPM, it's only going to go, the divisions only go so small in most DAWs anyway. In Reason, they sadly, and I hope they fix this soon, only go up to 64th notes. They will not go up to 128th or 256 notes. So when I work at higher BPMs, I usually do my divisions in 8th notes, because if you start trying to do syncopation or groove in 16th notes at higher BPMs, it kind of gets iffy, because it's really, you're only going to get that groove on the 8th note once you start getting up past 200 beats per minute. I don't know why that is. It's just how it seems to function. Because one of those 16th notes is going to fall on the second half of the 8th at times, and then you'll get this weird kind of off-kilter sound that doesn't quite sound right, at least not when you're going for groove. Now, you can do shuffle step things and staggering that will make it sound okay, but generally, for simplicity's sake, I like to keep it in divisions of 8th notes. And a lot of people still don't find what I do danceable, even when I do that. So I'll go ahead and bring in the snare here. The snare is also working in halftime. This is a basic pitched snare that I use very frequently in my music. It's definitely borrows from that sort of dark step, industrial hardcore vibe. Bring it down just a touch. And then what we've got going on here is basically this is 16 measures right here, this loop, right? And anything, as long as it adds up to that binary, is going to be good. To that binary division. You're going to find that this is kind of what I call the Meshuggah method, because it comes straight from Meshuggah, or at least the way most people sort of are able to take apart their tracks and make them understandable, even though they really don't write this way, and I completely see why. Because it doesn't make sense to write this way. They're just arranging things differently around a 4/4 core, which is what they've said multiple times. But basically, to let you visualize it, these right here, I'm going to move this because this was just basically a counter instrument I was just using on the sequencer to kind of keep track of where I was. It's not actually playing anything, or it shouldn't be. I'm going to mute it. Gonna double, triple mute this thing. So here's the snare right here, what I'm grabbing, and here's the loop player. And these are all going in 4/4. The loop is 8 measures long, and the snare segments, as I have them set up on the sequencer, are 2 measures long. I mean, I can join them and make them, you know, it's whatever. They're all in that same binary power, you know, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, 128, 256. It's that same division that around which so much, you know, around which music revolves pretty much, especially when it comes to 4/4 and everything being divisions of that. It's all those binary powers. I don't know if there's a word for it, if I'm using the right term. Math was never my strong suit. I actually sucked at math in school, but I feel like music's made me better at it, and I'm not just saying that. Anyway, so that's our 4/4 chord, but then up here, you got something a little different happening, right? You can see just from looking at the sequencer. I'm going to go ahead and shrink this. There's no reason you guys need to see all that. So these 5 are all the same thing. This is the kick drum right here, by the way. And which isn't playing yet. I've still got it muted. But each one of these 5 right here is exactly 23 eighth notes. So this pattern right here is basically 23/8. That's the time signature it would be considered if it just looped back and forth and there was no other landmark around which for your ears to grab, like that snare. Yeah, 23/8, 23/8, and then at the end here, this last one is 13/8. And so when you have 5 23s and then a 13, 5 times 23 plus 13 is 128. So that's one of those binary powers. So that adds up to 128 eighth notes, which is 16 measures in 4/4. This is the Meshuggah method. This is what they do most of the time. They've done other things too. I'm not trying to simplify them or like, you know, whatever. They've definitely done things way more complicated and crazy than that, where it's basically just a completely random, almost just series of divisions that eventually repeats, but doesn't repeat at all within itself. You know, just something that just takes that long to resolve. But I'm going to go ahead and unmute this kick here so you can hear it. So right there is where it started over, and it's starting over again here. And then there. And then there. And this last bit is a little different. but different parts of this beat line up with the snare and the percussion every time. So you get this kind of rolling, rotating syncopation that changes every time up until the repeat at 16. So what you could do is you could combine all of this and make it one long measure of 4/4 that just takes 16 whole measures to resolve. And that's what I was referring to in the intro episode as hypermeter, where you've basically got one long measure of 4/4, but it's just not repeating until a much later division. Like most 4/4 measures are going to repeat after like a measure, not 16, you know? But someone listening to this over and over would eventually catch on to, you know, oh, like there's that double beat right when it repeats, and that's kind of the audio clue. And you could do further things to kind of draw that out and make it clear that that's what's happening. We'll get into that in a later episode, but that's basically the Meshuggah method. I'll add in a bass line here for you guys. Bring it down a little bit. Bring my headphones down a little bit too. Damn. That's just like a basic psytrance bass line kick. You got kind of the industrial percussion in the background, and you got this kind of drum and bassy snare. You know. Anyway, I'm gonna move the loop over, and we're gonna kind of you're gonna see another division. This one it's the same beat, I've just cut it off sooner, and that's 17/8. Each one of these is 17/8, and this last smaller piece is 9/8. So you've got, let's see, 1 2 3 4 5 7. So 7 times 17 plus 9 is again 128. So you got 128 eighth notes, 16 measures in 4/4. And it's that same, like if you look at here on the sequencer, look at this right here. You can see briefly right here, just stick it right there. You can see it's the same notes as before, the same pattern as before. I've just cut it off right there. Kind of neat, huh? Maybe a little bit. But once again, you've got different repeats lining up in different places with the snare, with the constant. And that's what makes the syncopation. So even if you're not able to dance necessarily to the kick, you still got that snare that you're able to nod along to or headbang or whatever you want, dance, what have you. But the kick and that pattern lines up differently every time, right? All right. So now, so that's the Meshuggah method. It's just making various divisions of numbers, just any series of numbers for whom the sum is one of those binary powers, is going to share a common resolution with 4/4 sequences. So, you know, like 22/16 times 5, and then 18/16 times 1 is 128/16, or 8 4/4 measures, you know. There's several other methods that I've developed through the use of a sequencer, really, that are altogether different, and I'll go into those next. I'm gonna go ahead and mute the bass line again, and we're just gonna get back to our basic loop here. And these I'm gonna kind of construct from scratch because I think they're best served that way. But okay, so right there, that's just a basic 4/4 beat, right? That's a pretty basic rhythm we're all used to. There you go, 4/4. Like it's a staggered little break beat, whatever. So this method that I frequently use is it's something that I call, this is just my name that I just made up for it for the purposes of this video. It's called beat staggering. which is constructing basically a riff of, or a rhythm of beats that's, you know, typically simple. If not 4/4, then something not too crazy beyond that, 3/4, 5/4, 6/4, any of the common time signatures outside of 4/4. And then staggering it one beat forwards or backwards, and then doing this in increasing or decreasing increments. You know, forward a quarter note or an eighth note, and then 2 quarters or 2 eighths. So I'll just show you an example of that now. So this is one method that I commonly use. I just edge every single one of these pieces forward. Like that. And because of the nature of this particular beat, it's really just coming off like thirds, basically, third beats. But if I were to get a little weird here, and I don't know if I'm ready to do that in 16ths, but we'll try quarters. Yeah. And this is coming off really simple because it's a really simple beat, but we can get crazier with it. So, like right now, the whole repetition is just this, and you could just combine it like that, and then that's basically that's the pattern, that's the repetition. So that's one way. That's like the most simple. That's like the most simple way, I guess. And then, okay, so the more interesting way is basically to do it in increasing or decreasing increments. So like if we wanted to spread it out, let's say we'll do like 1, or just vary it up completely, like do 1 2, 1 2 3, and then back to 1, then 1 2, and then 1 2 3. Now you got this weird pattern. It's like, you know, it's spreading itself out a little bit. And so like this part repeats once right here, and then there's just another like little piece, and then it gets cut off and it goes back to the beginning. So if you're paying attention, you can catch that pattern, but you know, probably not when you're like at a festival or in a club dancing. But it's a fun little thing that I like it. I like the grooves that it creates, and I like to see if people can figure it out. That's kind of what I'm all about trying to do, really. So anyway, that's just one way. And I'm using a really simple beat here to kind of show you the method in other videos as I build on this file, because I'm probably going to be teaching you guys mostly with this file, and I'll just expand on it, you know. But like this being a really simple beat, it's not going to sound like anything too crazy. But anyway, here, okay, so we have, so now let's try actually shrinking it a little bit. So we'll go forward 1, and we'll go forward 2, forward 3, forward 4. Wait, was that forward 4? Okay, well now it is. And then forward 1, forward 2, forward 3, and forward 4. And then just to give it a neat resolution, we'll go, I don't fucking know. We'll do something crazy like that. Yeah, sure. Yeah, a lot of the stuff in my music, I just fucking wing it. There you go. See? Nothing really all that crazy. But that's basically beat staggering. Now another method that I use is just beat removal or beat additions. Again, just another name that I came up with for it. Nothing really special about it in particular. So I'll bring in this piece from the last part, and we'll just stick it right there. And that'll be kind of our measure that we're working with. And so this is kind of like an additive version. You're still staggering the beats, but it's a little bit different this time. So what we'll do is we'll bring this forward one, and then I'll stop this for a second, and I'll just stick an extra beat right in there. So I just added just 1/8 note to the beginning there. That's all I did. See how different that sounds compared to what it was, which was really just this over and over. Over and over and over and over and over. Like, I don't know. Like, when I work with rhythm, I like to hear, I don't know, I just like to hear an evolution, I guess. And it's exciting to hear that because you don't expect it. But all of this is in 1/8 note increments. I mean, with the exception of that like 32nd or 64th roll at the end. I mean, whatever. But anyway, you can also do beat removal. So let's go ahead and I'll just hack an entire 2/4 off that. And then we'll just repeat that part. Yeah, it's the same form of kind of staggering the beat forwards or backwards, and really it achieves a lot of the same effects as the Meshuggah method, but it's, you know, it's a different way of getting there, right? And almost all of my tracks do this to some extent. Almost all of my tracks use one of these methods. The last method is probably the one that creates the most crazy results. So and it's at this point where I start to lose track of what's going on. But like, okay, so I'm gonna join this all into one solid thing. So that's just one solid 8 measure loop, right? But it's repeating in spots off of the 4/4 measure, right? Now, let's just say that we went through and we cut it up on the 4/4 measure. Right there, right there, right there. Okay. So now we've got all these different pieces. Like, look at each of these pieces individually. They've all got different beats inside them in different places. And then we stagger those. Well, not that much, goddamn. We stagger them just a little bit. See, now you can barely, now I can't even really find the pattern. I mean, I know it's there, but I've taken an already rotating beat and I've divided it up and spaced it around a 4/4 chord that it doesn't follow. But all the beats are still on beat. They're all eighth notes in eighth note increments. It's just, you know, it's a little different, a little weird. Let's bring that bass line back. Now the last method that we can use, all right, is kind of cheating, honestly, but sometimes I get lazy and I do it. And that's using an arpeggiator, which is to say, one of these bad boys. And this is really more of a rhythm generator than an arpeggiator in a true sense. And basically what I just did is I connected the gate output to this, so for each one of these it's triggering a kick. And right now we've got kind of a basic kind of psychord thing going. Good old familiar 4/4. Let's stretch this all the way to 32 steps. And I'm going to cut the density. Well, actually, no. You want to make the steps odd if you want it to repeat unevenly. So this whole thing, if it's 32, it's only going to repeat twice in the course of, in the course of 8 measures, if I'm going by 8 notes. But I'm going to shrink it down to something awkward like, I don't know, we'll say fucking, I don't know, we'll do something weird. Let's do 25, whatever. Already it's weird. Like you're hearing 4/4, but then right there, it cuts off in the middle of the 8th note. So we'll lower the density a little bit and take out some of these kicks, and then it'll get really strange. Or if you're like me, see, these 16th notes are all falling on quarter note divisions. So they're in 3s, but you'll notice the first 16th note of each of these little blasts falls on the quarter or on the 8th. Right here, as you can see. If it were to start like over here, it would kind of sound a little weird. But it sounds, if you start like a 16th note sequence like that, it can still sound alright at higher BPMs. As long as you're basically using a burst of 16th notes as you would like a single quarter note or a single 8th note. It's basically a blast beat. But maybe we'll try like hacking off a couple more of these, and then we'll go full on crazy. That's a little weird. Maybe because if the repeat falls on an awkward beat, then it's going to sound a little strange. We'll put it on 20 steps. So this whole sequence is, I guess, coming out to 10/16. So if we divide 32 and 20 by half, we'll get 10/16. So that's like a 10/16th note sequence. Or I guess it would be 5/8, I guess. Maybe. That's another way to do it. Is basically to get in any arpeggiator that will let you set a number of steps and then repeat those in such a way as to where it's, it's weird. And when you've got an arpeggiator like this, it'll automatically reset to the beginning, depending on how you wire it, which I won't go into in this episode, whenever the loop repeats. So you'll notice that whenever it's getting to the end of the loop right here, it's starting back over at the beginning no matter where it is in here. See? You hear that? So, that's one method. And yeah, you can do some really crazy shit with this. Are we feeling weird yet? I too easily amuse myself. Yeah, if you're not... I don't make this shit because I think somebody else is gonna like it. I'll make it because I like it, And that's really what you want to do. Or at least that's what some wise person told me. It's not honestly doing me a whole lot of good, to be honest. But it certainly feels it's a feels good when you do it. When you pull it off and you make something that you like and isn't beholden to anything else, It is a little bit. But the way you put together the pieces is, it's your own. And yeah, that's what matters. And yeah, I think that'll do it. So yeah, that's our session on rhythm and kind of how I go about it. And a lot of times, maybe this last little piece at the end that kind of fills out, the rhythm. Sometimes I'll stick a nice little piece of 4/4 in there just to get people happy for a second before it goes back into the craziness. Throw people bones every now and then. That's what I do, but you guys can do whatever you want. And yeah, that's gonna be it for today. So I'll see you guys next time, and we'll talk about other things. I don't know. Later.